So welcome to the People Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things people performance. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with me, the founder. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have the performance episodes delivered by the T2 consultants. If, after listening to our podcast, you want to get in touch with T2 about anything we do, please contact us at help@trans2performance.com. You can stream or listen to our podcast on all the usual platforms available. So for now, sit back, tune in, and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
Coming up on this episode.
There was a time I actually nearly lost my job because I hadn't looked after my own wellness. I'd become anemic. So my brain just wasn't working properly and I was starting to struggle with the workload.
What's interesting about what you said was, you're working really hard, but then you burn out. But it's because you're trying to just stay on that hamster wheel and achieve great things.
Absolutely. I often say to my clients, or to those that are considering doing things like breath work or taking time to work on themselves, it's actually, sometimes you need to slow down or you will be slowed down.
Hello and welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Tracy Roberts. And today we are joined by a very special guest. Welcome, Carly.
Hi, good to be here.
Good to have you here. Now, I'm sure the viewers and the listeners are wondering what interesting subject we're going to cover today. And I thought I'd let you tell them a little bit about what you do and what we might be talking about today, because I think you put it so much better than me.
Well, today we are going to be talking about breath work, and this is something I brought into my coaching service. So I'm a women's strength trainer. I work with many menopausal women, and I brought breath work into my coaching because at that time of life, when you get to midlife, we find ourselves with a lot of struggle, a lot of challenges, sometimes spinning a lot of plates. And I found that we needed something to regulate the nervous system when we're trying to put in these healthy habits. There's a lot getting in the way of making healthy changes. I needed something that would help on the psychological, the emotional systems. And I discovered breathwork personally for myself, but then I realised how much that was going to work for my clients. So I decided to go ahead and get some proper experience and training in it. So
brilliant. And I think for, I guess, some of our listeners, they might have had some experience in the kind of wellbeing space, maybe done some breath work, some mindfulness, dip their toe into all sorts of things holistically that might have worked for them. And I guess what I often find when people have gone in that direction, it's been because they've had this, amalgamation of stress, burnout, it may be in a little bit of a constant state of fight or flight. So that's why we felt that the stars aligned in terms of me meeting you at the gym. And it was a really good opportunity for us to think about how we could provide a little bit of context to the leaders and the listeners that listen to our podcast around how it can be useful for so many different reasons. And all those that you just mentioned there are fabulous reasons for people to start thinking about it. But I think for a lot of people, it might seem like, well, how can I integrate that into my day-to-day life? So maybe that's a direction we can travel today to have that discussion. But what would be really good, and we love this about this podcast, is our listeners love to hear about your journey. So, what's your background and how have you got here?
gosh, yeah, it's been quite a journey. Where do we start? So I guess I'll go back to my NHS days. So I started out as a dietitian, quite a science brain. So as much as it's quite holistic and quite wellness, for me, I was all about the science, the facts, the figures. Would have called all this sort of stuff woo-woo back in the day. But actually, my time in the NHS, as you may know, many of your listeners work there or manage people within these sort of systems, and it can be quite stressful. It's busy. We don't have a lot of control sometimes on our day-to-day activities. Things can change at the last minute, so you can have your day planned, and next thing you've got your whole schedule changed, and there's just this never-ending, access to more things that need to be done. So you're never really done. And I used to go home so stressed. I would raid the cupboard. So I'd go home, I'd drive home. Sometimes I'd be at the garage on the way, eating the chocolate bar to try and calm down, head straight in the cupboard, as a way to calm down before leaving work behind and getting into family life at home. So it didn't do me any good for my health. Over time, I learned to, get in touch with strength training, sort my nutrition out. So even as a dietitian, I still had my struggles, but we're all human. But again, just trying to meet those demands day to day of this constant, hamster wheel of work that was always going on, trying to stay well. And there was a time I actually nearly lost my job because I hadn't looked after my own wellness. I'd become anemic, so my brain just wasn't working properly, and I was starting to struggle with the workload. It took a while to figure out what that was, but when I realised it was anemia, I knew that I really need to look after me, because I'd just been looking after work, family, stretching myself, not doing anything else to account for, you know, the self-care that I needed, and it put my job in jeopardy. So actually that was a big wake-up call for me to know that I must prioritise myself here, because actually my job is in jeopardy if I don't. So I used to think I didn't have time, but it's like, no, it's absolutely a priority now. And so that led me down that path of really focusing on my own health. One thing leads to another as you start to get the benefits. I was coming to work feeling great after going to the gym, after really sorting my nutrition out. Starting to get a little bit preachy. I want to share this with other people as well. So in 2020, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna go for it and become a personal trainer. So I gave up my steady income, my safe, secure job, that I'd gone and done the degree for. I've been thought I was a little bit mad for doing it. So what would be giving that up to go and be a PT? But I really had this passion to show people how they can care for themselves, how this actually benefits their professional life, because my work was so important to me. And for it to have been put into jeopardy was just such a big wake-up call that I thought, there's so many people maybe coming out of work, losing their jobs, maybe going under performance management because of this. And I thought, yeah, that happened to me. So if I can do anything to help anyone else go through that, then of course I'll bring my spin on it. Because 2020 was 2020, wasn't it? That was a fun start.
That was a fun year. Fun's maybe not the word we should use, actually, but it was definitely an eye-opener for a lot of people, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
absolutely. So yeah, I left the NHS in the January. I lost access to the gym in March. And so that was quite a challenge. Really had to dig into my values to get through that. Did I want to stay? Did I want to go back to the NHS? All that sort of stuff. And it just sort of that building that business up from there, which was great. It was going fine. But then about a year or so ago, again, from all the work, from all the pushing to do better and get bigger and grow. I went through a burnout myself, and had to really take some downtime, had to reduce my workload really significantly and really work at a very different level. I'd just been diagnosed with ADHD quite close to that time as well. So I think it all just landed on me, and it was time to just take some downtime after quite a stressful few years of pushing and trying, and it was going well. So it's hard to sort of take a step back when things are going well. You don't want to. You feel like you're sacrificing things. But as part of that, helping myself to recover from the burnout, I discovered breath work through actually doing some guided meditations. I'd gone to some quite deep places, but found actually when I was on my own, sometimes I felt a bit confused after I've come out of these very meditative states and had no one to talk to about it. And so that's made me realise the value of having a facilitator, somebody with you, someone there as a bit of a guide, just to help you make sense of some of your experiences. So that's where I started to explore breathwork, and I found breathwork school that I went to train, and the rest is history. It started building it into my job, my clients, and yeah, and I started to see those improvements in their ability to build new habits, in their ability to just rest in between strength training sessions, and their ability to actually engage at work as well, meet the demands that are coming, and even just become more assertive as well, because sometimes you need to speak up for yourself, but you need to have that self-confidence to do it. So, yeah.
So many learnings. What I'm kind of overwhelmed with as I'm listening to you there is like the gravity of everything that's happened to you in the last 5 years, and how we've been able to grab those morsels of learning and turn them into a positive in some shape or form. Because that's a whole lot to experience in the last 5 years. A lot of courage to kind of make that move and go away from that, I guess, the safe space of the NHS to a degree, particularly during a turbulent time for the NHS as well. And what I like about it is you kind of come to what you do through your own experience of and how it's helped you. And I think quite often, in a lot of the conversations we have with leaders and people in organisations, there is a learning in the failure element of life, and we don't take a long enough time to sit and look at that and think, what can we extrapolate from that and use it as a something for high performance. And I love the fact that you've also linked in there, it's about self-optimization, isn't it? And how looking after yourself. What's interesting about what you said was, you're working really hard, but then you burn out. But it's because you're trying to just stay on that hamster wheel and achieve great things. And I think I can definitely refer to different times in my career where I felt very much on that hamster wheel. And I think that at some point it's going to slow down. And then that'll be when you go to the gym, or that'll be when you go and do some yoga or some breath work or something. I wonder how many people are actually watching the podcast right now that are thinking, yeah, that's me. I'm waiting for this moment where this wheel's going to stop. And it hasn't yet. So maybe there's a little bit of learning straight away in what you've just explained there about sometimes it takes me just to be thrown off a little to then dig back into what's important.
Absolutely. I often say to my clients, or to those that are considering doing things like breath work or taking time to work on themselves, it's actually sometimes you need to slow down, or you will be slowed down. And often that'll come through illness, or perhaps, problems with performance, needing to take time off work with stress. And that's a really big one that I see, because they just don't want to take that little step back. So actually, I'm big on letting people know we can actually start to do things long before it gets that far. We can take those small amounts of time that are so much worth it. And I actually believe that the time you take out, you get back double. I think there's actually a study, it was done on, it's actually done on strength training and employers giving employees opportunities to go to the gym on the lunch break. And they said a 20
We're
minutes.
all for that. All for
Yeah,
that here.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it was something like, okay, might not have the stats completely right here, but 20 minutes in the gym got you 2 hours of productivity back.
I can believe that.
Hmm.
Can definitely believe
Yeah.
that. So I guess maybe there's a couple of things to kind of debunk here, because I'm just thinking of, and we have the same when we're kind of looking at things on, wellness, productivity tools, this is sort of a productivity tool, let's be honest. But also things around some of our leadership ways of working and models and things we use. People will always have an idea of what that means, and then there'll be maybe some myths attached to it, etc. I'm wondering, what's the most common myths that you came across when you were talking to people about the kind of work you do in this space?
I think a lot of people find that taking time to slow down is wasted time. So they often find that actually trying to sit with themselves and often trying to do breath work or meditations on their own initially can be quite difficult. Their mind can be racing. They can be thinking of all the things that they could or should be doing in this time, even if it's 10 minutes sitting down. But again, it's just letting them know that actually there's ways to use that to your advantage. By the time you get back, the alertness, the productivity you actually get back from taking 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. But I think another big myth as well is the amount of time it takes. We can actually change our state with one breath. Now we can choose to do it for longer, and we can use longer breath works to have bigger transformations. But we can, with a bit of practice, one breath can literally change your state, and that can make a difference between perhaps a reaction or a response that you'd be more happy with.
We talk to people a lot about reactions and responses, and we have obviously started to integrate a lot of the language around this into a lot of the leadership and productivity stuff that we're working on here at T2. So I think that's another reason why we felt like there's a real affinity with our approach and how we can attach this to performance where people might not naturally put it in that space. One other thing that kind of occurred to me as I was thinking about this was, I came from a wellness space, and if I was ever going to be teaching something like mindfulness, or sometimes even some of the mind and body elements around yoga, Pilates, those sorts of things, quite often the vision that people get in their head is everyone sitting in a nice circle, humming, or, and it feels quite, I think the word that was used is fluffy from certain individuals I spent time with. And I think that's maybe one of the other things I'd like to debunk, because I've experienced obviously breath work. And there are different things that different people can get from it. And that's what I really liked about your approach actually was, I am that person who, I'm gonna admit to this now. I was in the hairdressers on Saturday for 2.5 hours, and I enjoyed it because I could take my laptop and do some work in peace. That is not good, is it? It really is not good. What I should have thought is I could take 2 hours to breathe, relax, take my time. So it takes a lot for someone to engage me in a way where I actually really realise that time is really well spent just working on myself. So do you ever get that kind of response from people? You know, are you all dancing around a meadow singing songs or singing Kumbaya? Is that the kind of experience that?
Yeah, I think that's where I think what they give me is the side eye. I definitely see the side eye happening. To be fair, I really enjoy the fluff, but I am very practical as well.
I enjoyed the fluff actually, surprisingly. But I think what's good about it is there is a science behind it. And I think for a lot of people, maybe that's not the assumption they make. They probably think it comes from a derivative of, you know, I mean, even yoga and they're all based in science, but I think people's may, you know, if they're not from a background, they might not necessarily connect in that way. So I think what's lovely about it is that you have said, look, the science was actually the interesting bit for me. And then the delivery element is actually how you can play around with it yourself. And from a personality perspective, you take a couple of different approaches to this. So sometimes you've got groups that work together, which I've definitely experienced. And you do one-to-one coaching on this, right? So what kind of people come to you for that? Is it a mixed bag?
Yeah, absolutely. It is people that are running companies. Some people are employees, within the NHS or other companies. And some people are sometimes have chronic illness, like chronic fatigue, or they're navigating a challenging time of life, or perhaps they're managing the menopause symptoms as well. So yeah, so we'll take this approach as to very much meeting person where they're at. I like to say, what is it that you need? But I start everything with assessment. So again, there's assessment that we can do with breathwork. So it's not just you do what I say, I prepared something, you go do it. Yes, in a group. There's a general theme because you come to it in group and that's got its benefits. With one-to-one, it really is about what do you need? What are we looking to achieve from this? What is the pathway? I really love to actually bring my coaching into breathwork and use it as personal development. So I think that's my angle with it. That's the thing I really love to do. Because sometimes I think as well, there's things that we want to work with clients, they can get a bit of resistance when you might ask someone to do journaling, you might ask someone to consider their values or work on self-acceptance or work on confidence. And these things can be really hard to do mentally.
They're uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, they're uncomfortable, they can feel a bit awkward. Then you just go blank with your mind. It's really common to just get a blank mind on these. So when this sort of thing happens, this is where breathwork comes in really handy. Because it is, like I say, with the science, we are changing the chemistry of our blood when we change our breath. So usually, we should be breathing through our nose all of the time, which is the best way to
Just
balance.
checking myself though. You know, when she said that, I was like, my.
I know when you're talking a lot, you can start to get a bit tired because we're doing a bit more mouth breathing than what we should be doing. But yeah, breathing with the mouth closed, you get more of that nitric oxide, which is the anti-inflammatory. That's what gets your brain on board. So that's really good for health and having the clear mind, when you're making decisions, especially mid-afternoon.
Yeah, round about now, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of sharing, some breaths that are great for mid-afternoon perk-ups because I know that is just absolutely dead time and can feel really terrible at the end of your day just trying to get to the end of the day. So I do love to teach a few different ways to breathe that can pick you up and just get you go into that last bit of the day.
I think that's wonderful, and I don't think many people would understand that. Obviously, we're going to go through some of the breaths, and I think we're actually going to film some content on this today where we can share with our listeners and viewers if they want to go through this process themselves. But what I like about that is that a lot of people might not make the connection between it being such a multifaceted thing, like i.e. what's right for you, what's right for someone else, situational. What struck me when I went through the last workshop we did was how the different breaths feel different to each person. So although we can say, oh, try this particular thing, that might not sit as comfortably with you, or in that moment might not be quite what you need. And I don't think many people would realise that actually there is a method to the madness, and actually there is a right breath for that time. So I think it'd be quite interesting to maybe think about actually some of the, maybe talking about some of the lingo, or maybe some of the breaths that you do teach people. I know we're going to, as I said, we're going to probably do a little bit of breath work for our viewers later, but what are the main breaths, shall we say, that you would use when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, like I say, so there is that over 90 odd breaths. We can do a lot.
How 90? Crikey.
There's so many.
And I can barely do one.
And then there's obviously different ways to do the same breath for the same person and same situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a few core ones that I do find I end up teaching a bit more often. And the first one I like to start with is just breath awareness. And all you're doing with that is you are just noticing what your breath is doing. So when we first start, we might sit still and we might put our hand on the chest and hand on the belly just to bring that awareness, because I mean, how many people are walking around totally in the heads, not aware of what the body's doing? I mean, that was a problem for me years
Yeah, I
ago.
can get that.
So yeah, first is just bringing that awareness. So you might need to sit still and make.
And what would they be looking for there? Because I know that this surprised me when you did this process with me. I thought I've got this going on because I'm very connected to my body because of the training and things that I do. I thought I'm going to be naturally quite in a good place with this, but I actually made quite a big. Well, there's a big learning from that session. So what are they looking for in that space?
So yeah, what you might notice, especially at work, you might notice that you're breathing mostly at the top of your chest. So ideally, to get a nice gentle breath, we want to get down to the bottom of our lungs. We have, good amounts of lung capacity that we don't access on a day-to-day basis. We have this dead air at the bottom. So just fully filling the lungs, at least breathing lower into the belly, getting the belly moving, even breathing into the back. So our diaphragm is a 360 all the way around. So we can actually breathe not just out of the belly, not just in the chest, but all the way using the back, fully expanding the lungs. But what can happen is we find ourselves at the top of our chest, often when we're answering emails, to the point where it's called email apnea, a new term that's come out just to describe the breath hold we do when we open our inbox. That blew me away, but also totally relate. I remember doing that, especially the NHS days, writing medical notes. I'd have my shoulders up by my ears, holding my breath and wondering why I'm so tight. Because I'd held my breath probably for minutes. Who knew?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how many of our subscribers right now are going, crikey, I definitely have that. I've just self-diagnosed myself with that. I don't think many people would take that time to think about. I definitely, in the moment when I was guided to that, it took me a minute to realize that sometimes I do sit here a lot. And I actually really felt the difference in trying to reconnect with my breath at that time. So even that's a good tip for people to start thinking about. If you can feel it starting to creep up here, it's an indication of slow down or try something different.
Absolutely, just that opportunity to almost put your breath down. So when it's up here, can you just take a deep sigh? So a sigh, what they call a physiological sigh. So you can take 3 sniffs in through your nose, then a big sigh. Again, that's a great nervous system regulation tool. So if you are het up or you're feeling tense or notice you're doing this breath hold, or you're really stuck at the top of your chest, then yeah, sort of 3 sniffs in and then just a long breath out through the mouth, or pursed lips as if you're blowing through a straw. It's another good way to try and lengthen the exhale. So when we lengthen the exhale, it signals to our vagus nerve that we are relaxed. Because actually, if we think back to our cave person days, when we were hunter-gatherers, if we were on the hunt or if we were being stalked, we would be breathing up in our chest. We would be, panting and breathing shallowly because we're getting ready to run away or fight. And when we breathe long and slow, into the bottom of our belly, slowly relax through the nose, we wouldn't be doing that if we were being chased. So that signals to the body everything must be fine. So we can have this bit of a cycle where sometimes we might have anxiety, but then we might have that anxiety treated, but we may have retained a breath pattern for anxiety, which is this chest breathing. So actually what I see in a lot of people is they've had treatment for anxiety, they sort of know they're okay, but they still have some of those feelings and they can't quite shake it off. And it's because we haven't got the body to just retrain that pattern again. So by retraining the breath pattern, we can remind the body that the anxiety is over. And also then that can also prevent anxiety, because if we're breathing slowly, if we're activating our parasympathetic nervous system, then the body will fall in line. The brain and the body do want to agree with each other, but often that's a bit of a fight to get that to
Yeah,
happen.
I can relate. I can completely relate to that. I think that's actually a really good point that you land on there, because anxiety shows up in so many different ways with people. In fact, we were just having a chat as before we started about how some people it's very external, some people it's kind of really internal and they hold on to it for a long time. And I guess in the business world and the kind of environments we work in, we work with elite sports people, we work with people who are in high-flying jobs, people who are getting to know a new role, and they do have that almost a positive anxiety in a way because they're kind of being retrained, retaught new things, relearning things, all those things. But anxiety plays a big part in, breath work can play a big part in how you control that anxiety, right? Yeah. And do you get a lot of people, that's the lead thing that they'll maybe mention to you, is that they're feeling that, and that's maybe why you're having to plug some of these techniques in for them?
Yeah, that tends to be the main thing, that feeling the need to calm down, maybe sleep problems, so they might not recognize anxiety, or it might not be as bad as being as far as a diagnosable anxiety, but they might have a sense of never quite being able to calm down, never quite being able to switch off. That's a massive one. That then leads into their sleep. So when we get poor sleep, we get poor choices the next day, whether that's business, food, whether or not you go to the gym, you're less likely to make these positive health choices when you're tired. And that can be a big one to try and get over. So sleep is a huge one. I mean, maybe as well because I work with a lot of menopausal, perimenopausal people. So maybe I have a bit of a bias because of who comes to me. But I think, yeah, when we mess with our sleep, it does knock everything off. And again, if you're trying to make these important decisions day to day, if you're trying to manage other people, they're going to actually, you're going to find them more annoying, aren't you? When you haven't slept, people are likely to get on your nerves a lot more than if you've had a good night's sleep, where you can actually take that step back, stay in your own centre and think, okay, I can see this person's got an issue. I can hold the space because I've looked after myself. So,
I
yeah.
love that, because I think a lot of people will give themselves a hard time for showing vulnerability in stress. So I'm just thinking of people who are trying to look like the master of everything at work, and it maybe isn't as external. So for some people, it's very external, isn't it? Like you say, they'll show their annoyance, they'll be less patient, etc. But for other people that are maybe more high functioning anxiety individuals, I think nobody would necessarily recognize that's what was going on. This is definitely something I've experienced over periods of my life where from the outside everything looks like it's in order, and I can deal with a lot of stress based on the types of jobs I've done. But it's taken me a long time to connect at those times with the fact that I still have anxiety, but it's in a very different way. And I think for people who work in businesses and organizations, particularly when you're very senior, it would almost seem like a little bit of a weird thing to admit that you maybe suffer from a different type of anxiety to the average person, because it becomes this kind of self-perpetuating circle of I'll bottle it, I'll deal with it, I'll bottle it, I'll deal with it, and a cycle of, actually, if I keep myself busy, and then your tabs are always open in your head, right? So then that has a knock-on effect with your sleeping and all those things as well. And I think that some people can actually function at a very, very high level, and it doesn't affect their conversations with other people as much as you'd think, etc. But when they fold into the background of being at home with their family, it can come out in those environments as well. Have you had clients share that with you, either way, like it affects me at work, or actually I'm very good at masking it there, but when I come home, it's different?
Absolutely. It's really common. Like I say, like that high function anxiety, as you said, what we can actually think we are the calm one, the strong one. Everybody comes to you, especially if you are at the top of a company, if you are the leader, then yeah, you'll be that person that everyone comes to. And there's a lot of validation in that. It feels really good. And this is where I was at. I was always the pillar, the strong person, the one that never fell apart. And I actually thought, truly believed I was super zen all the time, till I realized that was actually a freeze state. We'd become numb and unable to respond appropriately because we're not getting rid of the anxiety. We're not allowing it to pass through the body. It's just being stored in the muscles, being stored as tension. It can start to show up as health problems, so stomach ulcers, gastric problems, IBS. All of these things are really common when we've got very high functioning people not able to fully let go of the daily stresses, so they start to build up. And it takes an illness or a breakdown to actually give that time to let it all reset. So yeah, by using breathwork, we can get those resets in earlier, so we don't need to have those breakdowns, or use numbing, activities or behaviours to cope. So a lot of people might emotionally eat. They might be drinking. And not like to a level of being an alcoholic, but you're just having that glass of wine or two every night, just taking the edge off, and it becomes a real big habit. And maybe that's not going to help them in the long term with their performance or their health. But it's these like numbing activities when actually what they need to do is have a modality that lets them to express it safely and let it through the body, so it's not being stored in a way that doesn't derail the whole day, or feel like they have to take 6 months out and go to therapy. Nothing against therapy, but actually there's the combination between the talking and the body work.
But yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I like that. And I think the reason that I kind of wanted to mention that is, I should imagine there's a lot of people listening and watching right now that are thinking, yeah, actually, I wouldn't classify it as what I would think as anxiety, but I would maybe high performance even, it's maybe even masking it a little because I'm doing a great job. It doesn't mean though that, your nervous system is not in turmoil a lot of the time, even though you're turning out great work. So it's good to be able to, I guess, connect with that and think there is a vulnerability in stepping forward and saying, I probably need to try something different. But even if you didn't want to be as vulnerable with others, you could be vulnerable with yourself and realize that some of these techniques might be really helpful for that. And I should imagine there's a lot of people that are very high functioning that are listening to this podcast right now. So I thought it was a useful thing to mention.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we spoke about breath awareness. Is there anything else that kind of comes up as one of your more common breath techniques?
Yeah, there's a few more. So we have coherence breath. Now this is a great breath for the heart rate variability. So with your performance, you might be familiar. This is the ability of our heart to increase and decrease, depending on dealing with stress. Because we actually don't want to live completely zen lives because it would actually be a bit boring. So we want to be able to perform. So we want to be able to respond to the stress and actually enjoy the high of the little situation that you need to deal with. And sometimes you do need to do a bit of a sprint, and I think that's fun. But it's with the ability to come back down in between,
Yeah.
that then makes it sustainable. So again, it allows us to respond. So with the coherence breathing, we tend to do it through the nose, and all you do is you match your inhale to your exhale. So the studies say 5.5 seconds inhale, 5.5 seconds exhale. That's quite slow. So you can actually modify the time. You can do it for 2 seconds in, 2 seconds out. The more anxious you're feeling or the more activated you are, the harder it is to slow the breath. So I like to do it in stages, maybe 3 seconds and 4. And over time, you'll naturally start to see yourself breathing slowly. But like I say, there's ways to teach it. And then I like to let people have a bit more freedom. If we are doing a longer session of coherence breath, then I let them have their own counts. But day to day, that is essentially a secret breath work you can do.
I like this. We're being let in on all the secrets today.
Absolutely. So breathwork ninja. So you've got somebody in front of you, and so they are getting you a bit het up, but you just need to let them offload to you. You can just be doing this coherence breath, mouth closed, inhale, exhale through the nose, just breathing evenly and just keeping your ears open and let that person offload. You're regulating your own nervous system, so you're not taking on too much stress from somebody else while still, again, managing the situation. So it keeps you a lot calmer. It's going to keep your prefrontal cortex on board, which means you can make better decisions, respond accordingly rather than responding emotionally, which doesn't always go well in the work environments.
No, that definitely sounds like something we could all benefit from. And I just kind of went to a fun place there of when people used to say to me, in with anger, out with love. And that's what makes me think now when people used to say to me, in with anger, out with love, Tracy, just to take a minute. I think what I recognise with those breaths, and when you said 5 seconds, I didn't think it sounded long until I did it. And then I realised I definitely need to work on that because I was struggling a lot with either side, depending on what breaths we were doing, with does it feel like a really long time to be inhaling or exhaling? And I think it's great that you can adjust the timing to sort of work on it over a period of time, because I think it could be quite scary for some people who try to do breath work and they actually realise how I guess weird, is that the right word? Weird it can feel initially. And to be able to adjust it to the situation as well, obviously is really important. But I will be watching now to see if any of my team are now doing in with anger, out with love with me at any point during the next week. We've got a couple listening in today, so let's see what happens. And I guess is for one thing I was going to mention was like for a performance edge, that could be one thing that's kind of a performance edge thing. So the performance edge there is that you're not responding in the wrong way. For people who are working in environments where it is fast and furious and they're having to find spaces in their day to connect, is there something else that you could recommend that would be useful for them to know? So a productive time of day or an unproductive time of day as an example of that.
Yeah, so with breath work, I've talked about down-regulating breaths so far, so these are the calming breaths, and I think this is probably what most people expect breath work to be, is just calming, relaxing. But you can use breath work to activate yourself, and we do purposely use it for that reason. So day to day, if you're in the office, you might want to do something like a breath of fire or a
Oh, I
bellows
like the
breath.
sound of this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about the breath of fire.
Yeah, so this one, we're actually pumping our diaphragm. So you're not going to mind how much you've had to eat at lunch if you're doing this. But basically, we forcefully breathe out with the diaphragm, pushing the the breath out through the nose and then just letting the inhale naturally refill. So it's quite a strong pulse. So you might just go pulse, 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 pulse like that. You might do 10 breaths, 30 breaths and have a little rest and maybe do it again. It's probably all you'd want to do in the office. But essentially that just helps bring that energy into the body. So breath is energy. We have the words of chi, prana, these are all the words we use for energy. So by enhancing the breath in this way, it pumps it around the body a lot faster, gets it around the brain a little bit quicker, causes some activation because we don't normally breathe like this. So it gets the attention of the body. So if we're supposed to normally breathe in and out through our nose, quite calm, we suddenly start breathing quite quickly out of our nose. It's going to be like, what's going on? There's been a change. We need to pay attention. So it just brings the brain back on board. So if you are in that slump, it can be really good. Other people have told me as well when I taught it as a wake-up breath. Some people have told me it's great for getting anger out. So this is what feedback I've had. So they said it's great if they're feeling angry. It can be a way to discharge the energy. Because again, sometimes, you've probably heard this yourself, if you're quite het off and someone tells you to calm down, it's probably the last thing you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. When in the history has anyone ever actually calmed down when someone says calm down?
And sometimes you probably should, if you're going to say that, step aside because there might be a fist coming your way doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but actually, when we want to calm down from a really heightened state, actually using something activating, it's like a little step down. So rather than trying to go from, it's a bit like driving on the motorway at 100 miles an hour, trying to go from, 100 to 0, that's like an emergency stop. And you know how jarring that is. So actually having these staged little breaks, so actually starting the breath of fire, then maybe that physiological side that I said, maybe some movement, a bit of bobbing up and down, a bit of shaking the arms. And then eventually you might be able to find your way into the coherence breath. But I would say it's a bit of a staged approach rather than expect, if you are really up there on the ceiling, I wouldn't expect anybody to go straight into something relaxing like that. So
I actually like the way you've explained that around the 100 miles an hour and slamming on the brakes. I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and it probably makes a lot of sense to people listening now. I think what's also refreshing about this is that there's a lot of breaths from what you've said there, and a lot of people would associate it with bringing that nervous system down and slowing right down, etc. But what you were saying there is actually from a performance perspective, there's lots of different variations of this. You can put yourself into a pumped up state if you needed to,
yeah,
re-energize yourself as well. So maybe that's actually quite a reassuring thing for people listening now, is that it's not all about we're going to bring you down. I also like that staged approach that you just suggested, because I think for a lot of people it can feel high octane at work all day. And then I certainly feel like this sometimes. And it's a weird thing because it's not necessarily a bad feeling. But you get to the car and I can always tell what kind of state I'm in. And this is how I tell. I get in the car and I either turn my podcast on that I've been listening to, because I tend to have this habit of listening to a podcast in and out every day. It's because I want to feel clever. That's basically what it is. And then my other choice is my music. And normally if I get in the car, my music's sort of full blast. And I remember what a nightmare I was on the way in this morning. So it was all very, very loud. But if I have to turn it straight off and drive in silence, that's my indication that probably I'm a little bit out of kilt. And that's probably why it takes me that 20-25 minute drive home to actually reassess myself a little before I get out of the car, take a breath and enter into the family kind of environment, because there is a danger of not recognizing that and walking in the same state you've left work, I guess. So I am wondering if a lot of people get into the habit of maybe taking time in the car to not put yourself in a trance. Definitely don't do that. Homicide police will be around to blame us for that. But do you hear of people trying to use their time smartly? So if they've got a big drive somewhere or they're heading to a big meeting or things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I started calling it the breath of transition because I personally did it myself. Even if sometimes I would have back-to-back clients, I don't want to be carrying whatever's had from one client into the next client. So
Yeah.
if I wasn't too het up, I might just do that inhale. Okay, reminding myself of what's been, exhale the previous client, and then inhale to welcome the next client. So if you've got to your driveway at home, you might have calmed down by then, and you might actually want to breathe out the day and breathe in the welcoming into the home space. But yeah, things like the breath of fire, as long as you're not driving, as long as you are fully with it before you actually put the key in the ignition, because you can get a bit dizzy with breath of fire. So, you wouldn't want to do it whilst driving. Another great one is humming as well. So that actually generates lots of nitric oxide into the nose space. So that's your anti-inflammatory and your calming, sort of chemicals. And again, it's quite soothing. And as long as you feel okay, you could potentially do humming whilst driving. I actually learned before I did a breathwork course, I naturally did this all the time. If I was really het up, there was a song that had quite a nice tone to it that I could hum to, and it always calmed me down a lot. And then I learned with my studies, I thought, oh, actually, that's a thing. So it's something I found that I did naturally. And if I really was feeling very, activated, yeah, and something upsetting had happened, humming would actually make me feel really soothed. So it's a great self-soothing. Yeah.
It's strange that that was natural to you as a soothing mechanism, and then you recognise actually since then it's a thing. I'm wondering, I'm just thinking about people, because I have spent time with people over the years who have naturally gone into that state, and I wonder if they've been drawn to it for that reason, or if they're just trying to be annoying at work. I don't know. The jury's out on that one, I guess. So I'm just thinking about a couple of practical things that people could take away, because we're going to obviously get you to help us with some breath work for if people want to kind of join in with a part of a session in a moment. But I guess if leaders do feel like they're on this treadmill or this hamster wheel, from your perspective, what's the biggest hidden cost to that person in the long term? And what would your recommendations be in terms of a bit of a self-assessment? Does that make sense? As to, would breathwork be useful as an example, or how they would embark on that journey, so to speak?
Yeah, I think the biggest hidden cost is that time out through illness. I think we don't realise that we end up taking time, whether it's a physical illness or a mental health issue that comes up. But I've seen it too many times that this is the direction it often goes in. Sometimes, less obvious with conditions like viruses, illnesses, chronic conditions that pop up, or sometimes in the slightly more obvious mental health breakdowns that can occur. But it's that time, that recovery time is a lot longer than what people think. So actually, to get ahead of it if we can prevent that happening, then it's going to be, that 10 minutes you take is going to pay you back, however many times, more than you can imagine. It actually bring a lot of joy and, into your life as well. I think we don't connect with that enough, especially in our work lives. It can all be go, go, go. But what if you could lighten the mood in the office, and do something that feels just a bit uplifting for yourself? I mean, do we
Uplift is
do
a great
that?
word. Yeah, I was just thinking about how people can maybe start to so I guess it's the art of noticing, isn't it? So for me, I have, like, because I've been through this journey myself with different experiences as I've gone through my career, and I've started to notice the early indicators for me that will tell me that I will be off sick if I'm not careful, or indicators that maybe are more related to my behaviors, if that makes sense. So like if I'm starting to, I don't know, some of my shadow selves showing up in my home life, etc., or I'm starting to notice that things are triggering me more at work, they're sometimes my indicators of probably slotting in some of the stuff that we've been talking about today. Because I think over the years I have had to kind of do that little self-assessment every so often and say, where am I right now? And sometimes, as you said before, it can be a very short-term thing. You've got a lot of work going on, a deadline, and you've got to recognize if you don't put some stuff in place during that, you're probably just waiting for something to happen. But for other people now, I'm thinking, are you noticing the early indicators of some of these potential issues that could crop up? For some people, it's quite physical, isn't it? They notice some physical changes, like I said, behavioral changes, and quite often, like early, I guess, mental health related elements might start popping out. Do you think that with most people you've worked with, they've maybe not done that self-check-in as early as they could have done, and then as a consequence, you're having to get them to reflect back so that that doesn't happen again? Does that make sense?
Yeah, quite often people will come to me and maybe they're on their second time around. So sometimes they've had a bigger event happen, they've recovered, and then they probably do start to sense something's going off. And that's probably when they'll reach out for help because they don't want to go through it again. But yeah, I think in terms of the daily assessments, in terms of our that breath awareness, we can do that anytime, any place. We've always got our breath with us. We can't leave it at home anywhere. So, we don't need any fancy tools or anything. So we can always check in. How's my breath feeling? Where's the breath coming from? Am I breathing through my nose or through my mouth? How easy is it to breathe through my nose? Is it starting to feel a bit stuffy? Is that the first sign of a cold? What self-care do I need if I'm starting to come down with something? How is my sleep? I was coming down, I thought I was coming down with a cold the other day, but I had a few days sleeping on a blow-up bed because I'm moving house. And I finally had a good night's sleep and all the symptoms went away. And I thought, yeah, I just needed a
It's all
sleep.
linked, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of people can make the connections though, because maybe they're not as in tune with their bodies. I think people who naturally maybe have dipped into the space of exercise or activity in some shape or form, maybe have a little bit more awareness as they kind of get more clued up on it. But not many people in day-to-day life will make connections between the little small subtle differences in your physical kind of elements and think, oh, that could be stress, or that's probably why I'm not sleeping well. They maybe don't join the dots until it's too late. So I think it's a good thing to say is to do that daily check-in, but also just start to notice the changes in your body and your behaviors and think, is there something that I'm missing right now? And I quite like the idea of preemptive stuff as well, and thinking if I'm embarking onto this big project, or I wrote down here, I'm about to go in and do something quite acute. So something like a really, really high stakes presentation, as an example. We get a lot of people have to deliver at high levels. Then some of this stuff would be really useful, right?
Yeah.
So would you say the breath of fire would be good for going into a presentation or a high stakes thing? Or
Potentially
is there
how you
something?
feel. Depends on how you feel. I remember going to an interview once and I was so nervous because I was up against my colleagues. So you know how that feels when, yeah, and my chest was so tight. I was actually doing box breathing for that. So that was sort of inhaling, holding the breath, exhaling, and holding at the bottom. So we can do that one later. So I needed a calming breath at that time. But yeah, if you're feeling a bit numbed out and a bit dissociated, yeah, maybe the breath of fire can help bring you back into your body, bring some sensations. Even if you get some tingles in your hands, it can actually just make you aware my body's here, right? I'm in my body, not in that head state where you feel a bit sort of dizzy or a bit out of it and not connected to who's in front of you. So it depends, let's say, with everything. It's a very coachy answer. It depends. But yeah.
I like that answer because that's the answer I use for lots of things with my coaching clients. But I think that's a great thing for people to consider. There's a different breath for every situation, and it depends on the mindset you want to go into and the space you want to create. But it certainly sounds like if breath of fire is anything to go by, then there's definitely going to be a lot more fun breaths out there. I'm sure there's a lot you can give us some education on. Um, Okay, so beyond just feeling calmer and obviously some of these tangible performance benefits that we're hoping that people will kind of benefit from, do you think that this sort of stuff will really help our leaders make better decisions?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, often when I'm really at a sticking point or a transition point and I don't know what to do, I'll take it into a breath work. And so I will take that question, that thing I'm stuck with. You can take that into a breath work. There's a type of breathing called conscious connected breathing. It's a breathing that's often done through the mouth in a circular fashion. What that does actually reduces some of the oxygen to the amygdala, which is your fear center, and that can then switch off all the what ifs, all the problem, all the obstacles, and start to open your mind up to creative solutions and genius moments. So I
Oh, I love this already.
Yeah, so I love it. I've written talks after a breath work or in the breath work. I've woken up and scribbled it all down. Like, what a fun way to work. And I actually do this with people. I do future self sessions to get people to envision how they want their future to look. When we take them to a breath work, they come out of it, they mad scribble, maybe they draw and things like that. Or people have got a business question and they just want to give their body and their mind space because the answer's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But we can get, weighed down with all the what ifs or what if it goes wrong, or sometimes you can't access it in your normal day to day because you're thinking about your shopping list and your to-do list and everything. But yeah, so sometimes that's what these sort of slightly longer breath works are fantastic for, especially in one-to-one scenario, because you've then got your facilitator to talk through anything. You can talk during the breath work, they can shout out ideas. I could mad scribble them down for them, so it's so
It
flexible.
sounds fun.
Yeah. It is. It's a great way to work.
It's a really great way to frame it because I think, for people to want to make this part of their routine and make it a habit, they've got to be able to see the benefits. And some people in the kind of work we do, it's if I can't see it in this moment and, feel the difference it makes, it might be more likely that you'll just kind of put that to one side or maybe won't focus on it enough. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that, you've got to find what's right for you, use things in the right moment for what it's intended for. think about how it can help you, because this really, for me, it helps people not just regulate, but improve their emotional intelligence. You know, they're really tuning into that. And I think we know from everything that we do in leadership that we've really got to be able to tune in on that at the right times to make great decisions, but also to connect with the humans around us. So I guess the last thing I was going to ask you today was a really simple thing. If we had to get all of these leaders that we're working with now to integrate this into a really packed schedule, and to go to your point about the clients you see and kind of one going into the other, they've got meeting bleed all day, haven't they? And you had to give them one quick way to, you know, take that argument out of the equation and slot it into their daily lives. What's the one thing they do, or the one thing that they could do differently now, knowing this conversation today, to get the biggest output?
Yeah, I think just that one breath. So if we're walking from one meeting to another, we could actually do box breath with your steps. But I know so many people are back to back, like Teams calls.
Sat on the same chair, right?
That actually, even takes that out these days. So actually that single breath, just taking that big inhale, that sigh out. And if you're able to even just stand out your chair, stand up, big breath in, little shake off, and you're ready for your next presentation, client meeting. I mean, yeah, if you do nothing else, one breath between each session, is going to start bringing you back. Yeah, let go of the previous, welcome in the next one, breath of transition.
Love that. And I think going to your point there around box breathing, that's another technique which we might dip into on another session. But for you, if people have got that opportunity to walk between meetings, etc., there might be something in that. And I was always thinking about, we kind of always have a bit of a beef, if you like, with meeting and durations here at T2. We're like, why do you need an hour, or why do you need half an hour? Why can't it be 10 minutes or 15 minutes? And if you could just take that 5 minutes back between meetings, then yes, it does allow you to do the normal things, like actually go to the toilet or eat something, which is really important. But if it gives you a couple of extra minutes to apply some of this stuff, and you will enter that next space in a different space, for want of a better term. So thank you. It's been really interesting. I knew it would be, but I've really enjoyed this. So thank you for coming in to see us, and we're looking forward to doing some more work with you moving forward. And we're going to let our subscribers see some of your work. Hopefully you'll see this popping up as we kind of progress through the coming weeks. But thank you so much for joining us at the T2 People Performance Podcast. And thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2.